Most people think the reason their money feels chaotic is that they have not yet learned enough. I have never believed that. In my experience, most people do not suffer from a lack of information. They suffer from a lack of order. They have heard bits and pieces of advice for years. Spend less, save more, avoid debt, invest early, buy assets, watch your credit. Almost everyone has heard some version of these things, yet most households still feel confused, reactive, and stressed. Why? Because loose advice is not a system, and money without a system becomes noise. I have spent much of my life around capital, balance sheets, businesses, markets, and people who think they understand wealth because they know the right words. What impressed me over time was not who sounded smartest. It was who had a repeatable operating system. The best capital allocators do not wake up every morning and improvise their entire relationship with money. They use structure, they know what information matters, they know the order in which decisions should be made. They know which dollars are defensive, which dollars are offensive, which liabilities must be attacked first, which assets deserve patient ownership, and which temptations should be treated like permanent enemies. That is what I want for an ordinary person, not more jargon, not more panic, not another pile of disconnected tips. I want him to have an operating system. The first function of such a system is brutal honesty. Most people avoid that stage because it feels unpleasant. They would rather have motivation than measurement. They would rather talk about future goals than face current reality. But no system can help a person who refuses to establish his starting coordinates. I would never buy a business without wanting to know its income, expenses, debt, and net worth. Yet people are somehow willing to run their own lives on fog. Fog is expensive. A person should know 3 annual numbers so well they could live in his head without paying rent. Net income, total expenses, surplus, or deficit. I emphasize annual figures because life is annual even when spending feels monthly. Insurance renewals, repairs, gifts, travel, school costs, tax surprises, health issues, seasonal spending, family emergencies. All of this gets hidden if a person judges his finances only by how this month felt. A year tells the truth more often than a month does. When a person knows those numbers, the first veil lifts. If expenses exceed net income, the machine is broken. It does not matter how optimistic the owner is. It does not matter how motivated he feels after watching a video. If the number is negative, the household is bleeding. If the number is positive, then a different reality emerges. That gap between income and expenses becomes the seed of the future. Surplus is not spare money. It is the raw material from which freedom is manufactured. That distinction matters. Most people treat surplus casually because it arrives quietly. Income gets applause. Surplus gets ignored. A raise sounds impressive at dinner. A larger gap between earnings and spending often does not. Yet it is that gap, not the applause, that determines how quickly a person can reduce dependence on the next paycheck. That is why I have long believed that income buys lifestyle, but net worth buys freedom. Income is flow. Net worth is accumulation. Income can look glamorous. Net worth often looks invisible until it becomes powerful. A person with a large salary and no retained capital is more fragile than he appears. A person with moderate income, real assets, and manageable liabilities may be much stronger than anyone realizes. The public sees one kind of success. The private balance sheet feels another. This is why the second function of a proper financial operating system is classification. People put everything into one emotional bucket called money. I think that is a mistake. Money must be sorted by job. Income is one thing. Spending is another. Assets are another. Liabilities are another. Emergency reserves are one category. Long-term investment capital is another. Near-term goal money is another. Once these things are separated mentally, decision-making becomes more mature. $1 needed for rent next month should not be treated the same as $1 intended for retirement 30 years from now. A credit card balance at 24% interest is not morally or financially the same thing as a mortgage on reasonable terms for a house you can comfortably carry. A brokerage account holding diversified productive assets is not the same as cash sitting in a bank account, earning very little simply because the owner feels calmer. When the number does not move, classification creates intelligence. Without classification, everything blurs. When people say they are overwhelmed by money, I usually hear that they have too many blurred categories in their head. This is where debt enters the story. Debt must be evaluated soberly, not emotionally. I do not accept the childish view that all debt is evil, and I do not accept the equally childish view that all debt is just leverage. Debt must be judged by what it does to your future. Does it build earning power or productive ownership under sensible terms? Or does it finance impatience, convenience, ego, and short-term consumption at a rate that makes your future weaker? Those are not the same species. The reason many people feel trapped is not only the amount of debt, but the vagueness surrounding it. They do not know exact balances. They do not know all the rates. They do not know the real monthly obligation. They do not know which debt is an emergency and which is merely present. Lenders benefit from fog. Borrowers do not. That is why I would force debt into one visible list: balance, interest rate, minimum payment, due date, category. Once it is visible, it stops being emotional weather and starts becoming a solvable problem. I am perfectly happy with an avalanche method if the person is disciplined enough. Highest rate first usually saves the most money. But I am practical. If a snowball approach gives a person the psychological winds needed to keep moving, that may be worth the mathematical imperfection. I would rather watch a human being make imperfect progress than design a perfect chart he never follows. This is one of the central themes in all of money management. A useful system you actually obey is superior to an ideal system that flatters your intelligence and fails your behavior. Behavior matters more than most people want to admit. That is why temperament belongs inside the operating system too. Some people are impulsive. Some are cautious. Some obsess over every fluctuation. Some become sleepy and inattentive. Some are drawn to novelty. Some thrive with automation. Some need visible wins to stay engaged. Some panic under volatility. A financial system that ignores temperament is badly designed. I am not interested in personality talk as entertainment. I am interested in it because your financial system must survive contact with your actual habits. A 30-year-old whose spreadsheet says he can tolerate high volatility may in real life sell the moment markets fall 20%. The spreadsheet is not managing the account. The temperament is. A person who hates detailed tracking may fail with a system requiring daily updates, but succeed with weekly automation and a once-a-month review. A person prone to impulse shopping may need stronger friction between checking and savings, fewer stored payment methods, and stricter rules around purchase delay. None of this is weakness. It is designed. Rich people are often not more virtuous than everyone else. They are often just better at designing systems that account for real behavior instead of imaginary behavior. That is what I want an ordinary person to learn. The third function of a financial operating system is horizon matching. This may sound technical. It is not money needed soon, must behave differently from money needed later. A person saving for rent, taxes, school fees, a car repair, or a home deposit 2 years away should not expose that capital to the full emotional swings of long-term investing. A person saving for retirement 30 years away should not leave everything languishing in idle cash because the balance looks calmer that way. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of matching the tool to the job. I would have every person write down every meaningful goal, from the mundane to the ambitious, and then put time next to each one. 1 year, 3, 5, 10, 20, 30. The moment time is added, the financial system stops being abstract and starts becoming architectural. Some dollars must be liquid. Some can tolerate modest movement. Some must be invested aggressively enough to resist inflation and participate in long-term productive growth. This is where people go wrong by seeking one account or one rule to do everything. One pile cannot wisely solve every time horizon. A cash reserve is not a retirement strategy. A retirement portfolio is not a place for next year's tax payment. A savings account is not where 30-year money belongs if growth is required. A market portfolio is not where next year's tuition should be endangered. Every dollar should know its job. That sentence alone would save many households. The fourth function of a good financial system is forecasting. A budget is not a punishment device. It is an operating map. I prefer a rolling 12-month view because it catches what daily life disguises. It shows the shape of the year. It reminds you that unexpected costs are often perfectly predictable if you stop insisting on being surprised by them. Holidays arrive, insurance renews, school starts, friends get married, appliances fail, vehicles need work, children outgrow things, governments expect taxes. Life is not actually shocking as often as people say. It is simply inconvenient in repeating patterns. A 12-month forecast converts inconvenience into preparation. The baseline matters first. What happens if you continue exactly as you are? Then what happens if you reduce the obvious leaks? Utilities, mobile plans, subscriptions, food waste, convenience spending, underused insurance products, expensive debt. Most of the glamour in personal finance is misplaced. The truth is that a little reduction in ordinary leakage, repeated monthly, often finances extraordinary future improvement. This is also why I care far less about perfect budget ratios than many people do. 50-30-20 may be a useful starting point for someone. Fine, another ratio may help somebody else. But ratios are not wisdom. Clarity is wisdom. A household must know whether it is overfeeding the present and starving the future. That is the essential question. A budget should answer, where is the money going? And does that destination match the life I claim to want? If the answer is no, then the budget has done its job. The fifth function of a financial operating system is intelligent cash management. Most people leave cash wherever it happens to land, usually at a traditional bank that rewards them almost nothing while using their deposits aggressively to produce profit elsewhere. I do not object to banks earning returns. I object to depositors treating inertia as though it were policy. Compare rates, compare structures, understand liquidity needs, use an account that matches the money's actual job. Emergency cash should be accessible. Short-term known liabilities may belong in instruments that trade a little liquidity for a little more yield if the timing allows it. Long-term idle cash should be questioned ruthlessly. I do not like lazy money. Money can be calm without being asleep. This is where many people make a quiet but expensive mistake. They confuse visible stability with real prudence. A low-yielding account feels safe because the number barely moves. But if inflation quietly eats purchasing power, while the owner congratulates himself for being conservative, then part of that comfort is an illusion. Over long horizons, cash that remains idle can be its own form of risk. This is why the sixth function of a financial system is staged transition into investing. I do not want a person to leap recklessly from chaos into markets. That is not intelligence. I want order first. Get a little breathing room. Build at least a starter emergency reserve. Attack toxic high-interest debt. Then, once the household is not one ugly surprise away from panic, begin investing for genuinely long-term goals while continuing to strengthen the safety structure. I like this two-engine approach. One engine builds resilience. The other builds growth. Many people fail because they wait for total emotional perfection before investing anything long-term. Years go by. Inflation keeps moving. Compounding keeps offering itself only to those in the game. The person says he is being cautious. Often he is simply delaying adulthood in finance. At the same time, some people rush into investing while still carrying expensive debt or no emergency reserve. That too is poor design because the first downturn or life interruption forces a bad decision. They then blame investing for a mistake that was really structural. This is what I mean by an operating system. The order matters not because rules are sacred, because bad sequencing creates fragile outcomes. Once investing begins, simplicity becomes a virtue. I have no objection to intelligence, but I have a large objection to unnecessary complexity. Broad, diversified ownership of productive assets has served patient people very well over long spans. Low fees matter, asset allocation matters, diversification matters. What I do not want is a beginner mistaking financial literacy for the ability to narrate a complicated portfolio he does not understand. Cleverness is overpraised in finance. Durable behavior is underpraised. Most people would be better served by simple diversified ownership, automatic contributions, low friction, and a time horizon long enough for volatility to be survivable than by trying to outsmart professionals after 2 weekends of research. The portfolio should be matched not just to age, but to structure and temperament. Age matters because time is a cushion. A young person has more capacity to endure volatility if the money is genuinely long-term. A person nearing retirement has less time to recover from severe declines. Fine, but temperament matters too. A younger person who always panics is not actually a high-risk investor, just because a chart says he should be. An older person with a solid pension, strong reserves, and real calm may be more capable of risk than a crude rule suggests. This is why I value self-knowledge so much. The best financial systems are not merely mathematically sound. They are behaviorally survivable. The seventh function of a financial system is protection against concentration and lifestyle traps. Concentration can sneak up in ways people do not notice. If one company pays your salary, gives your bonus, and also dominates your investment holdings, you may have quietly made your entire financial life dependent on one institution. That may feel convenient and loyal until it becomes disastrous. Diversification looks boring until it becomes heroic. Lifestyle traps are even more subtle. Cars are sold through monthly psychology, not through total cost. That is deliberate. If people had to stare at full ownership cost, interest, depreciation, insurance, maintenance, and opportunity cost at the same time, many purchases would collapse under their own absurdity. But if the decision is framed as a monthly payment, identity slips in through the side door. The buyer begins financing a story about himself and calling it transportation. I have no interest in financing identity through a depreciating asset. Boy, transportation, not theater. Down payments matter. Loan length matters. Total monthly transportation. Burden matters. Insurance matters. Maintenance matters. But more than formulas, what matters is refusing to let a car become a stealth wealth killer just because society treats automotive display as normal. The same humility belongs in housing. The rent versus buy argument has become tribal, which is unfortunate because the real answer is situational. Ownership offers control, stability, and potential equity growth. Renting offers flexibility, lower transaction costs, and optionality. Houses also have maintenance, taxes, illiquidity, and down payment opportunity costs. Mortgages are not magic. Some part of the payment builds equity. Some part is simply cost. The right answer depends on location, rates, mobility needs, family situation, and personal psychology. What I want people to avoid is inherited dogma. Their parents may have bought in a world with different price-to-income ratios, different rates, different tax treatment, and different labor mobility. That world may not be this one. Think, run the numbers. Add the psychological value, honestly. Then choose the life design, not the slogan. This is the eighth function of a financial system. Integration. Most people make decisions in isolation. They ask, can I afford this car? Can I afford this apartment? Should I buy this house? Should I invest? Should I pay off debt? Should I save more? None of these questions make full sense on their own. They must be integrated into one system. The answer to the car question affects the investing question. The housing decision affects the emergency fund target. The debt burden affects risk tolerance. The goal timeline affects cash placement. The temperament affects automation needs. Everything touches everything. That is what wealthy operators understand intuitively. They do not merely know facts. They know sequence, they know interaction, they know trade-offs. That is why I say financial literacy is not vocabulary. It is system vision. A financially literate person can say, this is where I stand. This is what I owe. This is what I own. These are my goals. These are their horizons. This money is defensive. This money is offensive. These liabilities must go first. This automation will protect me from myself. This purchase would weaken flexibility. This choice would strengthen net worth. This is my next step. That is literacy, not jargon, not hot tips, not the ability to repeat a phrase you heard online, structure, order, self-awareness, follow through. I have met plenty of educated people who were financially illiterate because they had no system. I have met ordinary people who were financially excellent because they built one. That should encourage people. You do not need a finance degree to build wealth. You need enough honesty to stop lying to yourself. You need enough clarity to map your current reality. You need enough discipline to separate jobs for each dollar. You need enough patience to let the system work. And you need enough humility to keep it simple. That is more than enough. Once a person has that, a great deal of money chaos begins losing its power. The noise fades, decision-making improves. Surplus starts having a destination. Debt starts shrinking with intent rather than hope. Goals become engineering problems rather than fantasies. Investing stops feeling mystical. Purchases stop being isolated emotional events and start being judged by how they strengthen or weaken the system. That is what I want from financial literacy, not the performance of intelligence, the architecture of freedom. And once a person starts building that architecture, he no longer feels that money is happening to him. He begins using money deliberately. That is the moment wealth becomes much more possible.